You're watching the Sobriety Social Podcast.
Okay, so first and foremost, I want to start off by saying, honestly, how much I love you and how unbelievably thankful I am for your willingness to even come on the show and have this conversation with me. Because I know something that we were talking about in the car on the way home from work today is just how difficult it can be, just considering the fact that this story feels so much like it's my story and a journey that I walked through. And a lot of times when we're talking to people about my recovery story and my journey of addiction, it's all reference behind like what I went through, maybe what I put you through and that type of thing. But not very often do people get to hear your perspective. And so I'm super thankful that you're even willing to have this conversation with me.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here.
Yeah. And the other thing that we were talking about today is just how we want this podcast to be a place where people, we're not just constantly talking about how much life sucks or just about all the crappy times. And I know that those things may come up maybe today, maybe in the future, but we're really wanting to focus so much about how amazing life is post-addiction and how we're just like absolutely crushing life and how even life here in Minnesota is greater than anything we could have ever imagined. So with that being said, what are some of like the super great things that you feel like are going on in our lives right now?
Well, right now I think I think that it's pretty exciting. We have a new baby, Everly, and that's been really fun. She's almost 3 months now. She'll be 3 months probably by the time that this podcast comes out.
Yeah.
So that's really exciting. We have 2 Cocker Spaniels that are the love of our lives. And that's great. I think it's really cool that we have like a church family that we're a part of and just a small group that we go to. Great friends.
Yeah.
We haven't had that before, so that's kind of fun that we're in a position now where we have friends that are our friends and not just like your friends or my friends. It's both of our friends, which is fun.
Yeah, I think with that being said, that's something really good that we can even just start to build on right there is something that we noticed very early on after I got out of treatment was how for some reason after we got married, we developed this sort of like culture in our relationship or this sort of like habit that was I had my friends and when we got married, you moved out to Colorado from Oregon. And so I had my group of friends, pretty toxic relationships, not super healthy. And you didn't really have anybody. And it was kind of like, well, you can kind of be friends with my friends, but I wasn't really willing to let you into that part of my life because I wanted to keep those areas separate. And so we never really had healthy relationships together. And I guess just I would like to ask kind of like, what has that meant to you post-recovery? What has it meant to you for us to have friends together and relationships together, people that we both get along with and are both friends with? And what has that kind of meant to you as far as like,
Yeah.
Well,
I think that it's been amazing. I think having friends together, we have two sets of friends that are also married and pretty young, like around our age. And so it's great to have people kind of in like the same life, part of their life that we're in.
Yeah.
Same season, except we're the first ones to have kids. But I think it's more encouraging being able to like talk to, I don't know, just being able to have other people to talk to about us and relationships.
Yeah.
And encourage each other in our marriages and having like that godly counsel from them I think has been really helpful and awesome. It's also changed like gatherings, social gatherings together. Being able to like all get along and all have like the same inside jokes. And
Yeah.
that's kind of fun, which we didn't have when it was all of your college friends. It was like you guys had your things that you laughed about, and I was just kind of like the third wheel that sat in our living room serving dinner.
Yeah. So do you feel like, because you and I are pretty open about my struggle, like maybe it's a little more me than you, but whenever we're in a new circle, I usually throw it out there pretty quick and put it on the table. Mm-hmm. Do you feel like that ever holds you back from making friends, or you ever feel afraid to bring up like our history together and just like what I went through around addiction, just like when it comes to making new friends?
No, like after you already tell them?
No, I just mean more like if you meet
Like just by
somebody
myself?
new for the first time,
Okay.
do you think that that's a hard topic to bring up, or do you feel like you're at a point where you maybe embraced the addiction
Right.
or recovery lifestyle?
Yeah, I would say that I'm pretty comfortable with it. At work, I know I'm a receptionist for a local health clinic here,
Yeah.
and I'm a float, so I kind of hop around to all of these different clinics. So I'm meeting new people all the time, and in those meetings, gatherings, introductions, I tend to always tell people
Yeah.
our story. Usually it starts off with like, where are you originally from? And I'll say Oregon, and then it's like, yeah, my husband's also from Colorado. And then people are like, why on earth are you in Minnesota then?
Yeah.
So it's kind of an open door to share your story and our story of like, why did we move out here, and that you were in treatment and
Yeah.
all of that. So I would say I'm pretty open about it, and I like when people ask me about it and like my side of the story and how I felt.
For sure.
That doesn't happen often. I'm not sure why, but I think it's always pretty positive of just like, oh, great, that's awesome that you guys are making it and you have a baby, and Josh is almost 3 years sober.
Yeah.
And yeah, so
Yeah. I think that this may be a good point in time for me to maybe explain in a little more detail about how we ended up in Minneapolis and why we're here and even doing this. I'm not sure. I know that there's been bits and pieces along the way, but basically I was in music college in Colorado, and Heaven lived in Oregon. And so we did the whole long distance dating thing for a little while. We met in Colorado for a short period of time, but we never started dating. We ended up reconnecting online a couple years later. And so we did the long distance thing, but once we got married, she moved from Oregon to Colorado. And so that's where we lived when we first got married. And then shortly after that, we had been married a little over a year. That's when I ended up moving out to Minnesota for treatment. And after spending about 5 months in inpatient treatment here in Minneapolis, I really started to feel like I don't want to go back home to Colorado. I'm afraid to go back to those relationships, back to those memories. And so I called Heaven, and I started to express a little bit more of that desire of wanting to stay in Minneapolis. Can you take a little time to just sort of like walk us through what you were thinking at that time, or like were you kind of like I can only imagine what you had been going through those last 5 months. Something I talked with my dad about when we did an episode together is how I'm in treatment and I have this opportunity to really work on my life, work on myself, and focus on becoming healthy and better as a human. You didn't have that luxury. It's kind of just like, well, your husband is moving halfway across the country for rehab, like chill out here and you can kind of like decide if you want to stick around or not, or you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So I guess if you could just take a little time just explaining what you were going through.
Yeah. So You flew out for treatment, and when we first when you first needed, like, decided that you wanted help and to move out to Minnesota, or we decided that that's where you should go or whatever. Yeah, so there were 2 weeks where I stayed back in our apartment in Pueblo, Colorado, with your mom, and she was helping me kind of pack up the apartment and move out and all of that. And during that time, her and I just we talked a lot and tried to process just the last year of what was happening. And
Right.
and so,
And just kind of processing what you guys had been seeing and what you'd been feeling and experiencing, like, over the last year of just while I was using.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. And then I was able to take a trip out to see my family out in Oregon. So my mom actually, like, flew out to me because I wanted to take a road trip. And
Yeah.
so she flew out to me, and then we drove to Oregon together.
I always forget that you guys drove all the way out there together.
Yeah. So we had, like, great conversations. I was able to process even more with her. And I didn't really tell my mom a whole lot about what was happening that first year, of, like, how many times you were drinking, how many times I caught you. She wasn't really involved in any of that. I would say more so your mom, and then I had, like, a mentor back in Oregon that I would talk to.
Yeah.
But I kind of wanted to keep my mom out of it. Just
Why do you think that is?
because I didn't want her to look down on you, or
Sure.
I know that before we got married, because we got married super fast. I mean, we were only dating for maybe a year,
Right.
and then got engaged and married within the next year. And so she already was a little skeptical, and I remember her sitting me down and letting me know that.
Right.
And so I didn't really want her to know that she was right and that I didn't know who you were.
Sure.
And but yeah, and to kind of just protect you. But after, like, during that drive, I was pretty ticked off at you and didn't really care. So I just told her everything and explained all my heartache, and but also there was still a lot of grace too in what I was saying, and justifying things. But anyways, so we had a great conversation, great talks. In Oregon, I had this opportunity to be home finally after so long of not being home.
Mm-hmm.
And I was planning on staying there for 2 weeks, and it was during Halloween. So I was going to stay there for that holiday, and then we were talking about, well, maybe I stayed for Thanksgiving. Either that, or we were talking about maybe me staying throughout all of the holidays,
Right.
Thanksgiving and Christmas. And this would be, like, a perfect time for me to do that because Josh is gone and I'm here, and I could just soak it up. But I just kept feeling uneasy about that.
Right.
And I don't know why. Like, I was so disappointed that I was feeling uneasy about wanting to stay. I had a job lined up for me in Salida that I had worked out before I went out to Oregon. So,
When you were saying that, like, you were thinking, I want to stay, were you thinking, like, I want to stay here until Josh graduates from treatment? Or were you thinking, like, I think I might just stay here forever? Or
No.
are you not really
Yeah.
sure which?
during that time, like, we were talking about me staying for the holidays, all of the holidays.
Right.
And then, so, yeah, what I was saying though is, I kept feeling uneasy about staying there for the holidays.
Sure.
And, I wasn't quite sure why. It didn't make sense to me because it was a perfect opportunity. I had every reason, every right to stay there for the holidays.
Yeah.
And yet I feel like God was telling me that I needed to go back.
Mm-hmm.
And I was really angry and really mad at him because I didn't understand why.
Right.
But I just had this huge pit in my stomach every time I thought about staying. And I think once I drove back to Colorado with my mom and she flew back out to Oregon.
Yeah.
So I was finally home alone. I just started really reading the Bible. And it's kind of funny. I didn't know what to read. And you were reading something and I was telling you that I wasn't sure and I wasn't really into the word. And but you had all this time and to do it.
Right.
And you told me that I should just go ahead and read Philippians.
Mm-hmm.
So I did. And gosh, God taught me a lot. But once, like the very first day I started, I finally realized that if I would have stayed for the holidays, I would have wanted to stay until you were done with treatment. And I think I was just making excuses, and like the root of what I was wanting was to get away. Sure. I just wanted to run away, and I was home. I was safe. I wanted to stay. There was no way I wanted to come back to our life. I didn't want to deal with it. I was 19 when we got married.
Yeah.
I think I was 20 at this point.
Yeah.
And I didn't know what I had gotten myself into.
Yeah.
And so, and I also had people telling me that that was justified if I wanted to stay. Like people at my home telling me that I could, and nobody would think anything of it. If I wanted to call it quits on this whole thing, I could. And I just knew that I couldn't. And I didn't know why, because I think deep down I really wanted to be able to say, okay, I give up.
Right.
But I didn't allow myself to give up. And that's when I started, like, every single day just reading, what is God wanting to tell me through this book, Philippians, and reading it as kind of like a letter of him speaking to me. And every day it was something different. And and I just kept pushing, kept praying for you, kept praying for me.
Yeah.
I got real about what I was feeling, and I explained all of my anger. Yeah. Just poured it all out to God, and just allowed him to start healing me and
for sure
finding the positive.
Yeah, I was thinking something when you were talking about early on in the story, just about how really in the thick of my mess, you weren't really wanting to talk to your mom a whole lot about it, just because you wanted to protect who I was in her eyes. And I think it's really, really interesting to talk about how when you finally had the chance, because during a lot of that time while I was using, I feel like there were some defense mechanisms that were going on inside of you to protect yourself. But one of those was being able to protect me, and wanting to protect the way people viewed me and things like that. What I find so interesting, though, now in hindsight, now that I'm sober, is it's almost the opposite, where it feels like you can tell people my story and it doesn't feel like you're having to protect me as much. Like you're not hurting my reputation by sharing that story now. I guess my question to you would be, do you think it would have been helpful for you back then to be more open with the people, like your loved ones, about what may have been going on? I mean, I guess that kind of, it seems like, well, that's an obvious question. Well, like, obviously it would have been helpful for me to be more honest. But in hindsight, do you think that talking about it would have made it easier for you to realize and want to like walk away? Or like, what advice would you have if like somebody, for the other wives or husbands or loved ones out there who may be going through some of these things and feeling like, I think that my spouse might be using her, I think there's something seriously going on wrong here? Yeah,
I think for that person, you should definitely have a person that you're talking to about these things. I had your mom and Triva, my mentor from Oregon,
Right.
that I would talk to. And they allowed me, especially Triva. It was sometimes a little hard to talk to your mom because you're her little boy.
Yeah.
And so for her to not then get super defensive of you.
Mm-hmm.
But with Triva, it was like I was able to tell her all of the struggle, but it was in a way of, what do I do? Like, how do I still honor God in this relationship, or honor my husband, or all of that?
Yeah.
I think that it's good that I did not talk to my family, because I knew that the feedback I would get from them is, leave. You can leave him. And I know that that's not what God wanted. I know that that's not why I got married. I mean,
Right.
like, I knew I wanted to get married to you and I wasn't ready to give up. And I know that that was all the feedback I was going to be getting from them. But yeah, so I definitely had people, an outlet that I could talk to, get advice. Yeah. So I think that people should definitely have someone that they're able to just pour out, but maybe that person not being so quick to say, like, oh, you should give up. I mean, like, being wise and all of that, but yeah.
Who you talk to. Yeah, I think what is kind of interesting about what you're saying, though, is like, I don't think your mom would have ever told you to, like, leave me because she was being malicious or wanting to cause you to, like,
right,
to end your marriage. But in the same way as sometimes, like, communicating directly with my family is hard because my parents would, like, have a predisposition to protect their little boy. In the same way with you communicating with your mom, she would have a predisposition to, like, protect her little girl. And kind of, I guess what I'm hearing you saying is, like, find a non-biased third party who's, like, vested in our relationship as a whole, and allow that person to speak into your life. I think that that's incredible advice. And just, like, because the ultimate goal, right, is to not to allow this to end relationships. But also you were in a position where there wasn't a lot that you could do. Nothing was going to stop me. And so to have somebody like that who was going to encourage you to still protect my reputation in people's eyes, but still be able to really, like, share what's going on, that's really, really good. So the other thing that I think is interesting is just talking about the aspect of, why do you think it feels different now? Why do you think now that there's been some recovery under my belt, it's a little bit easier? I guess I shouldn't say it's easier to talk about, but it doesn't feel as much as, like, it's damaging my reputation to talk about it now.
Well, I think that you knowing where you were, like, you know that you were messed up, and you know how you made me feel. You know that you were emotionally abusive, and you talk about it. I think it makes it easier to talk about. And also knowing where we are, that you are sober, and there's some positive in that. There's a lot of positive in that.
Yeah.
So I would say that's what makes it easier to talk about, is that you're accepting of it. Like, we're not hiding it. It's not something to hide it. And I would say sharing it more probably helps, because then you have a lot of eyes on you, knowing that you are proclaiming to be this person, proclaiming to be sober. So a lot of accountability.
Yeah, it builds that accountability.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. So I have one more question, like one more serious question, I guess I want to ask, and then we'll we can start to wrap things up. But that would be, how do I now? It's easy for me to own this as my story, as my addiction story, my recovery story, but understanding that my side of the story is only 50% of the story. You're 100% involved and part of this story as well. How do I protect you in the way that I talk about things. Like, I think sometimes it's easy for me to, in public settings, to start talking about like, oh yeah, I was an addict. These are some of the things I did. These are some of the things, or some of the ways that I acted. And I can forget that that's also can feel like a direct reflection on you, and people are thinking about how you might have been impacted or what was going on in your life. And I can sometimes not be considerate in thinking about like, how's this conversation affecting you? What are some ways that I can be more careful to protect you and your emotions while having those conversations?
Yeah. I think that with the vast majority of people that you talk to, you tell them stories, like specific incidences.
Yeah.
Or situations that have happened. And I think that those are hard for me. I think that reliving those and just putting me right back into, like, you're putting me back into that story that I have tried to move on from, or forgiven you for. And it's just causing me to relive them, which I think can be difficult and hard with that. I would say that that's one area that I think it's good to talk about those stories, but I don't think everyone needs to hear the real like nitty gritty unless they're asking about it.
Sure.
Then I feel like we should be very open and talk about that if they want to know, but to just like throw out that information all over the place here and there, I think that can, like, I don't know, make me feel like, oh my gosh, these people don't get it. They're judging me, judging like, how could she not have known, or, or whatever it may be.
So it's kind of less about like what I'm talking about and more like, am I allowing you the opportunity to be prepared for it? And like, am I catching you off guard?
Yeah, maybe. Yeah,
for sure.
Like emotional mood swings.
Yeah. So on a little bit more of a lighthearted note, this is one question that I've liked to ask guests so far when bringing them on the podcast. But one thing we know for a lot of people when they're going out to eat or going out to a restaurants, there's that huge bar menu, the huge liquor menu, and you go in and you look at all this stuff, like all the beers on tap or whatever, and then we're over here like, oh yeah, I'll take my Sprite or my water with lemon. What do you drink when you go out to a restaurant?
So my go-to is Shirley Temple's all the way.
Yeah.
And I think that servers make fun of me too about it.
Yeah.
Because they call it a kiddie cocktail. And I don't want a kiddie cocktail. I want a Shirley Temple.
Yes.
Give me what I asked for. Listen to the way that I say it. Give that to me.
Yeah. That's something really funny. Every time we go out to eat, she'll order a Shirley Temple, and about 50% of the time the servers always repeat back, kiddie cocktail. And we both look at each other like, that's not what she said. Why do you always put it that way?
Yeah. But that's definitely my go-to. That and root beer. Or like, I love fancy lemonades.
Yeah.
If we're having like a really nice dinner and I want something fancy, I go for some sort of fancy lemonade.
What restaurant would you say you've gotten like your favorite fancy lemonade at?
I don't know. I think that we went to Four Bells in Minneapolis, right by Loring Park.
It's a really nice seafood restaurant.
Yes, and
I got the steak.
Yeah. I don't know what it was called, but I got one of their fancy lemonades, and it was absolutely delicious.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, again, I really appreciate you being willing to come on. I love you so much, and I know that this, for those of you that don't know my wife personally, she has a lot of incredible insight to give. She's one of the wisest people I know, but she also sometimes takes a little bit of time for her to warm up to certain things or different activities.
I'm very shy, if anybody does not know me. All of you guys.
So I'm really grateful for you being willing to do this. this definitely won't be the last time that we bring her on. I think this is just a good little warm up for us to continue to get used to what it feels like to record a podcast together, and for you guys just to get a little more insight into who we are together. But yeah, thank you all so much for listening, and yeah, we'll talk to you soon.